In the Central Archive of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, in the fund of the 236th Rifle Regiment, a document dated the 20th of September, 1943, is stored. This is a memorandum from the Chief of the Sanitary Service of the 38th Army to a member of the Military Council of the Front. On yellowed paper, a deficit of standard uniforms in the first-class Army warehouses is recorded, which at that time amounted to 84% of the normative requirement. The document states that the arriving reinforcements, numbering 6,482 men, have no clothing allowance and are being distributed to combat units in their own civilian clothes. This archival source serves as a starting point for a detailed military technical analysis of one of the most critical stages of the Battle of the Dnieper, related to the activities of field military commissariats. Before proceeding to a detailed analysis of the documents and figures, we ask you to subscribe to our channel. Your subscription helps develop the documentary Chronicle format, support work with archival primary sources, and release large-scale historical analytical investigations. By the end of August 1943, the material and technical base of the formations of the Voronezh, Central, and Southwestern fronts was severely depleted after the completion of the Belgorod-Kharkov offensive operation. According to the Table of Organization and Equipment number 04/500, a Red Army Rifle Division was supposed to number 9,354 men. However, the actual strength of most formations that approached left bank Ukraine fluctuated within the range of 2,500 to 3,800 men. Line companies numbered 25 or 30 bayonets instead of the authorized 143. In conditions where the rear reserves of the Stavka of the Supreme High Command were located up to 400 kilometers from the front line, and the throughput capacity of the restored railway lines was only 4 trains per day against a requirement of 18 trains, the front commands made the decision to utilize the internal demographic resources of the liberated territories. The legal basis for this was provided by Stavka Directive number 3087, issued back on the 9th of February 1942. This document granted the military councils of active armies the right to independently conscript those liable for military service within their operational zones. Within the structure of each advancing army, field military commissariats were deployed, which moved directly behind the forward units as part of the Army headquarters' second echelon. The normative radius of responsibility for one such commissariat was 25 kilometers along the front and up to 30 kilometers in depth from the front line. The economic potential of left bank Ukraine after 2 years of occupation was destructured. German troops during their retreat applied scorched earth tactics, destroying elevators, bridges, and draft animals. In the Chernihiv, Poltava, and Sumy regions, up to 70% of the tractor fleet was destroyed, and over 80% of the cattle were driven away. This meant that the mobilized local population could not be provided with food from local resources, and the centralized supply to the front was delayed due to the transport collapse at the crossings over the Siversky Donets and Vorskla rivers. The daily expenditure of ammunition exceeded the volume of deliveries by 2.5 times, which forced the command to rely on increasing the density of manpower in the direction of the main attack. The chronicle of the deployment of mobilization measures in the Sumy and Chernihiv regions from September 10 to October 15, 1943, demonstrates the high intensity of work of the field apparatus. The headquarters of the 40th Army, using 11 field military commissariats, mobilized 32,842 men, aged 17 to 50 within 3 weeks. The conscription procedure was as follows. Advance battalions would occupy a settlement. Within 12 hours, an operational group from the Field Military Commissariat, consisting of 3 officers and a platoon of submachine gunners, would conduct a house-to-house sweep. Lists were compiled based on village elder registration books or through personal questioning of witnesses. There was no medical commission in the field. According to Front Headquarters Circular Number 12/2043, only individuals with obvious signs of disability that deprived them of the ability to move independently were subject to examination. After registration, conscripts were formed into marching companies numbering from 100 to 250 men. Leadership of the company was entrusted to a sergeant or junior officer from among soldiers recovering from wounds. The marching companies were sent to Army assembly points located 40 kilometers from the line of contact. According to archival reports from the Personnel Department of the Voronezh Front Headquarters, the average time from the compilation of the conscription list to a person's enrollment in the rolls of a combat unit was 48 hours. This precluded the possibility of completing a full combat training course, as provided for by the programs of reserve regiments, which were designed for a minimum of 180 training hours. A critical situation developed with the material support for these contingents. Frontline quartermaster depots lagged behind the pace of troop advance by 150 kilometers. Due to a lack of motor transport, the Army motor pools had a 42% shortage of ZIS-5 and GAZ-AA trucks. Overcoats, tunics, and footwear remained on the left bank of the Psel River. As a result, conscripts remained in the clothing they were wearing when mobilization caught them. Most often, these were dark-colored peasant svitkas, quilted jackets, suit jackets, and homemade footwear made of coarse leather or fabric. Hence, in the oral recollections of participants and the enemy's operational reports, the terms black infantry or black svitka wearers emerged. The German radio intelligence of the 8th Army of the Wehrmacht noted in its reports of September 24th the appearance at the front of large masses of infantry without insignia and in civilian dress. A logistical audit shows that small arms for reinforcements also arrived unevenly. In the 13th Army of the Central Front as of September 22nd, for 3,000 conscripts from the Chernihiv district, there were only 1,230 Mosin rifles, model 1891/30. This led to a violation of statutory norms for supplying combat units. Regimental commanders were forced to distribute weapons directly in battle. Part of the reinforcement went into the attack in the second and third echelons, with the task of picking up rifles from fallen comrades or capturing trophy weapons from German units. The report of the commander of the 71st Guards Rifle Division notes that in the battles for the bridgehead in the area of the mouth of the Pripyat River, up to 30% of the personnel of the first call marching companies had no personal small arms during the first day of battle. When examining the chronology of events, it is necessary to highlight the first instance of serious discrepancies in archival sources concerning the number of mobilized individuals. The consolidated report of the Central Front Headquarters for September states that in the sector of the 60th Army, 24,500 people were conscripted and sent to units. At the same time, if one refers to the documents of the Quartermaster's Service of the same 60th Army, namely the ledgers for issuing dry rations and enrolling in field kitchen provisions, the figure cited there is 31,200 people. The difference of 6,700 people indicates that a significant portion of the conscripted population was sent directly to rifle companies. bypassing the intermediate accounting points at divisional and army levels. This led to people losing their lives in the very first battles without even being entered into the lists of irretrievable losses of specific regiments, which distorts the modern statistical picture of the operation. The second example is related to the planning and topographical miscalculation of the command when organizing the offensive on the Buchren bridgehead at the end of September 1943. Conducting a detailed audit of the decisions recorded in the combat logs of the 40th and 27th Armies, it becomes obvious that the choice of the Dnieper River bend in the area of Veliki Buchren for delivering the main blow by the forces of the 3rd Guards Tank Army was erroneous. In this sector, the right bank of the river is a complex system of high, steep hills cut by deep ravines with slope gradients of up to 45 degrees. The height of the cliff above the water level reaches 80 meters. The German command, with the forces of the 19th Tank and 57th Infantry Divisions, had managed to create a deeply echeloned defense here. On the summits of hills 42.2 and 61.1, long-term firing points with overlapping fields of fire were equipped. The density of German MG-42 machine guns reached up to 15 units per every 100 meters of front. Due to the inability to promptly ferry heavy artillery and tanks across the Dnieper, only 2 heavy pontoon bridges were operational across the entire front, which were constantly under attack by enemy aircraft. The Soviet command threw infantry units, manned by civilian conscripts, into frontal assaults on these heights. The density of artillery support on the Buchren bridgehead on September 24th was only 12 guns per kilometer, instead of the standard 60 guns, according to the 1942 Breakthrough Charter. The marching companies, consisting of untrained men in dark civilian clothing, were clearly visible to German fire spotters on the sandy shoals and open slopes of the hills. The combat log of the German 24th Tank Corps records that Soviet infantry units made up to 8 attacks per day, attempting to overcome the height near the village of Romashki. Due to a lack of skills in dispersing on the battlefield and an inability to dig in under fire, the conscripts suffered heavy losses from 81mm artillery mine fragments and heavy rocket mortar fire. Over 3 days of fighting, the 309th Rifle Division lost up to 65% of its strength, with the bulk of the losses falling on the replacements conscripted a week earlier from the Sumy region. The third example of archival contradictions and tactical errors is revealed when analyzing the interaction between engineering units and infantry in the area of the Lyutezh bridgehead north of Kiev in early October 1943. Documents from the engineering troops of the 38th Army claim that by October 3rd, all first echelon units were fully supplied with crossing means, 3 boats, NLP ferries, and rafts. However, reports from the commanders of the 136th and 181st Rifle Divisions indicate that their regiments forded the river on improvised means: logs, doors, and bundles of reeds. Field military commissariats delivered reinforcements to the shore without providing life-saving equipment or watercraft. The flow speed of the Dnieper in this sector is about 1 meter per second, and the water temperature did not exceed 10 degrees. An inability to swim and heavy, soaked civilian clothing led to up to 15% of mobilized men losing their lives during the stage of overcoming the water obstacle, under the impact of enemy artillery barrage fire from the right bank. Let us conduct a critical audit of the command's actions through the lens of the 1942 Red Army Infantry Combat Manual. Article 141 of this manual explicitly prohibits committing units to battle that have not undergone cohesion training at the squad, platoon, and company levels. The manual requires that every soldier know his firing sector, signals for coordination with artillery, and be able to operate in conjunction with supporting tanks. In the situation of the field mobilization of autumn 1943, these requirements were ignored due to operational necessity. The offensive was conducted at a high tempo, up to 25 kilometers per day, and halting to train reinforcements would have meant losing the initiative and allowing German troops to solidify on prepared defensive lines. The commander of the 40th Army, Lieutenant General Chibisov, in his explanatory note to Front Commander Vatutin, dated October 8th, pointed out that reinforcements arriving from field military commissariats did not know how to use RGD-33 grenades or execute rushes under machine gun fire. Yet, he emphasized that without immediately integrating these men into the companies, it was physically impossible to hold the bridgeheads with the strength of the exhausted regular units. Thus, there was a conscious violation of manual standards to achieve the strategic goal: holding and expanding the bridgeheads for the subsequent liberation of Kiev. Technical aspects of the combat operations show that the German side effectively exploited the lack of tactical training among the mobilized men. German machine gunners deliberately allowed dense chains of attackers to approach within 150 meters before opening up with devastating fire. In the absence of smoke screens, the frontline shortage of DM-11 smoke grenades was 90%, and weak counter-battery efforts, attacks turned into frontal pushes to dislodge the enemy through numerical superiority. Meanwhile, assertions that conscripts were mass used for mine clearing with their bodies find no direct confirmation in either German or Soviet combat orders. Engineer reconnaissance and mine clearing were carried out by Army sapper battalions. However, due to the high density of German minefields, up to 2,000 mines per kilometer of front, and the nighttime nature of the attacks, untrained infantry often deviated from the reconnoitered paths and entered mine barriers, leading to massive sanitary and irrecoverable losses. The consequences of this mobilization strategy were profound in military, technical, and demographic terms. By the end of November 1943, after the conclusion of the Kiev offensive and defensive operations, the total irretrievable losses of Soviet troops at the Dnieper, according to official data, exceeded 400,000 men. According to estimates by modern military historians, based on demographic balances of the regions, the share of residents of left bank Ukraine mobilized by field military commissariats in these losses ranges from 25 to 30%. Most of them fell in battle or were wounded within the first 2 weeks after conscription. The material and technical base of the sides underwent changes. By drawing on enormous human masses, albeit untrained, the Red Army managed to tie down large forces of Army Group South under the command of General Feldmarschall Manstein and prevent him from transferring reserves to the critical sector near Lyutez. This created the conditions for a flank attack and the liberation of the capital of Ukraine on November 6, 1943. German troops lost their defensive line along the Dnieper, which Hitler had declared an insurmountable eastern wall. From a technical point of view, the use of field mobilization allowed for the preservation of the professional corps of front-line divisions, officers, sergeants, communications specialists, and artillerymen, compensating for losses in the rifle chains with local population. However, the economic and demographic outcome for the liberated regions proved catastrophic. in Poltava and Chernihiv oblasts. In 19 settlements surveyed by commissions of the People's Commissariat of Agriculture in 1944, there was an almost complete absence of the male population born between 1923 and 1926. This led to an acute shortage of labor for the restoration of agriculture and industry in the following years. The tragedy of the Black Infantry was a direct result of the supply crisis, time deficit, and rigid demands of strategic planning, where human resources were viewed as the primary compensating factor in the shortage of technical means of warfare.